So, Carolyn, it's a pleasure again to be speaking with you, and it's lovely to see you in that bright room.
Oh, goody. Yeah, we've been having a lot of sun around here, too much, and it's very hot.
Good, good. Glad to
But
hear. Well, actually, at the end of our last conversation, just as I'd stopped recording, and I was mentioning to you anything in your mind that we may continue with, and you said that perhaps the theme of relations and relations between ourselves as human beings we could talk about. And I thought that was an excellent subject because um, it seems that the times we're moving through, we really need to give us an impulse to kind of bring it back home and to think about our humanness, our humanity, and how humans are so well endowed and so critical to this time moving forward, and especially when it seems like a lot of social bonds are being deteriorating and being broken down. At the same time, we need to perhaps put the focus on how to restore a period of restoration and perhaps improvement of the social relationship, especially in this time of increased digitization. So perhaps we can start off with this theme of relations between humans, and it as is often the case in life, the things which seem so simple are the most difficult. So any thoughts on where I'd like to start on this idea of human relations and what it means and how important it is?
well, I think it's essential, and I think we have societies probably since before biblical times in which war is a standard, and fighting over territory and belief systems and goodness knows what is what we take for granted. And so it's something that has had to be dealt with for as long as we have written history. And I think now may be the time in the world when we're finally taking it on. At least I hope so, because it's pretty basic. Lately, I've been reading the Old Testament, who knows why, but uh, just saying, what's in there. And what is in there is war after war after war, and God smiting down everybody in incarnation, and everybody vying for land and vying for whatever. And it's a whole mindset. And it's a mindset that has informed our cultures of this time in the world. And I think it's up for grabs now, or I hope so. And so, what I would love to see us beginning to really dive into is getting along with one another on the very simple levels, on the obvious levels: neighbor to neighbor, sister to brother, parents and children, nation to nation, uh, race to race, where we're in war with just about everybody for, name what, it's sort of everything. So it's a mindset that we have been taking for granted for a long time, and I think it's up finally to be in question. It's like, what are we doing? Who are we that we insist upon doing this? So I like to look at the larger in terms of the smaller, which is invariably myself, and how I get along with people. And if I'm really honest with myself, I'm very judgmental. I will judge anything, even though I don't believe in it, and everybody, even though I don't believe in it. It's a kind of built-in automatic reaction, and I think it's shared with our species. And we've made some pretty huge messes with this. So, when I suggested that we talk about this one-on-one, two friends, that we recognize that this is an overarching problem.
Mhm.
And what the question then is, what does it take to change that within myself? to recognize it when I'm doing it. And it comes out as jealousy and irritation and all sorts of things. And we all do that. So that's kind of where I'd like to dive in.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Probably we can start by trying to kind of unfold why you think it is that it's so relevant for our times now. We have to kind of sort it out. I mean, you mentioned the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is like a history book in one sense, and history is a story, and so we've been living by these stories for so long. And you said that it's now up for grabs, which to me implies that it's now time for a new story. A new story is up for grabs, and so when a new story is up for grabs, it usually means that the old story is no longer working, no longer relevant, and that things are in more fluid, because it's much more difficult to put in a new story when the narrative is set. So it implies the narrative is more fluid. So why do you feel so much is up for grabs right now? What are the, how critical is it, and why is it up for grabs now?
Well, I think it's very critical for survival, because people fight over territory, they fight over water, they fight over, families fight amongst themselves. But I think there's another thing happening that I'm watching as closely as I can, and that is these new people who are coming onto the planet, and they're they are what I would call a new breed. There's a new mindset. They're often referred to as being on the spectrum, as autistic, very, very bright, but socially very awkward, almost as if, and I know many of these people, and we all have them in our families. And the new generation is coming in every day, and more of them have this dilemma, this sort of inability to find their place in the society as it is, and which we are trying to figure it out. And so, yes, we've gotten into this sort of nerve bundle, mm-hmm. socially, and wondering what in the world to do with these people who we call on the spectrum, who are intensely brilliant and quite at this point incapable of fitting into the society as it is. Mm-hmm. Which means all sorts of things, one of which is that the society is going to have to change. And then the question is, in what ways and how? How do we do this? How? Because ultimately what we're looking for as humans is love. That's what we all individually want. And it is what will make everything work in an ultimate way, even though we're racing fast down a different tunnel. But I want to say it's now or never, but I don't believe in never. I think we have an opportunity to do it now. We've got the intelligence on the planet and the will on the planet to do it. And we also have others who will do a lot to keep it from happening. Mm-hmm. So what do we do, and how do we do it, is the question I ask myself every day. And also one of my answers is, if not now, then when, but more so, if not me, then who? Which means that I really have to recognize all those ways in which I do not do that. I resent, I am jealous, I am glad if somebody's hurting, all that sort of war waging stuff that we humans are heir to, but I believe are at the moment of evolution where it has to change. So how do you do that? Well, on the large scale, I have no idea. On the small scale, I do have an idea, and it starts with me. So I'm trying to do that and to be as aware as I can be when I'm doing the opposite, which is about 25 times a day, but I catch myself and say, see, okay, there it is. See how you can shift that internally and see what happens. And since it's an energetic shift, what I've discovered is that others can feel it and are less self-protective and less likely to strike first. So that's kind of where I'm at, and where I am seeing a lot of the young people. Well, who knows at what point people are getting born. In my observation, there is a whole generation that was getting born kind of neither here nor there. The way I understand it is that their basic frequency is higher than, say, their parents, but their nervous systems have not caught up. And they don't know how to fit into what they come into. So there's a lot of that right now in this particular generation. And what I hope I'm around to watch us move out of that level of confusion. And I think it will happen. I have no doubt that it will happen. The question is when, and will it be in time? And I have to believe that it will be.
Well, you've always said in our conversations that you're looking at 1 or 2 generations. So, it obviously is not going to happen overnight, but it happens as a different kind of human being comes into the earth. I remember, reading about, the difference between kind of the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. When animals are born, for example, they adapt much quicker to their environments, and they're kind of independent much quicker of their mothers, and they can fend for themselves. But of course, human babies, when they're born, they're much more dependent first on being looked after. And according to the doctor, it's because they say the human nervous system is not fully formed when a baby is born, and because it needs to kind of feel the environment. What's the energetic environment? And then the completion is done in the social environment. That's why we're social creatures. We complete ourselves in the social environment. So if you're getting these new generations, and when all babies or all people being born, you're putting out energetic feelers. And I think it was important that you talked about this on an energetic level. You're putting out energetic feelings, and you're feeling, what's my environment? And then you adapt to that, which is why it's so crucial, the early years of a human environment. So whereas, of course, we've always assumed that any child has to adapt to the environment, it's not the other way around, then we get people who feel out of place because they can't adapt energetically to this current environment. But actually, it's interesting that you've mentioned this other way around. It's like a terraforming. The new humans have to terraform this planet energetically so it's amenable to them.
I just have to apologize for the garbage pickup, which is what all that noise is. It'll be
I can't hear
gone.
a thing. I can't hear any noise.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
No. So as I was saying, I'll cut that out. I was saying, so it's a kind of a way of terraforming, that the new people being born, the new children, have to try to get the energetic environment in tune with their needs. So they're not being born like a square peg in a round hole. They're trying to get the environment to form around them, which why it takes generations to get a new kind of energetic environment. So I think this all comes down to energetics, whereby the first wave, they can't really change the world around them because they're not enough of them, and the world's too static. Now I see society, like I said, in kind of flexible movement. So it's time where you can bring in a new wave pattern, a new energy pattern. And so therefore I think it's interesting that rather than we adapt to the energy environment, the energy environment now can be recalibrated. to be amenable to the new human being. But as you said, there are forces that are trying to hold that back, which is why I think the children are being targeted right now. If you look at the entertainment industry, all the kind of music that's been putting out, the films, the special type of digital distractions, whether it's games or apps, is trying to target a lot the younger generation. It's as if they're trying to be energetically held back. So when I see a lot of young people, when I go out and I see them stuck in their phones and being antisocial because, they don't know what perhaps social engagement is, because they're just Twittering. So I think there's that element as well, that there's a lot of young people being deliberately kind of distracted and they're not aware of it. So there's a lot of unawareness as well, don't you find?
Well, the unawareness is on every level. Those who are fascinated by all of this technology and are very bright, adults who are creating all these new game things, it's very hard to stop if you don't know that you ought to, or if the point of it all is to make money, then of course you want to have every kind of new way of doing the gadgetry as possible so that you actually can sell all that stuff. And of course the kids want to be up with the latest. I mean, they are the smart ones, and they're the ones who are actually having fun with it, I think. But they are also being caught by it. And maybe that's inevitable. Balancing is not very easy for any of us. And I'm remembering, actually, this is sort of irrelevant, but all this is bringing up for me something I witnessed a couple of years ago with a goat by the name of Maisie. Now, Maisie was having a child. When I happened on the scene, nobody else was around, and here was Maisie the goat pushing a baby out. And as she began to do what goats do, and many ruminants do, is they lick the afterbirth off the baby. And as she was doing this, the baby struggled out and took off, because it's a goat, not a human, took off right down the hill. At which point, the twin that I didn't know was there, maybe Maisie didn't know was there, started coming out. So there she was. She had to chase one baby, but she was giving birth to a second baby. And that baby, and she didn't know what to do. And she had the two of them. And she was trying to figure out, who do I take care of first, and how do I do it? Meanwhile, of course, afterbirth is streaming out of her poor body. And these two little goats, who are ambulatory within moments after birth, had different ideas of where they wanted to go. And she had to somehow get both of them back. So fortunately, I was there and I helped. But it was such a fascinating thing, remembering my own childbirths. There was no way either my babies or their mother, me, could have done any of that. It was an entirely different pattern of living on the earth. So yeah, it's very interesting that there is this difference between various animal forms and the human animal form.
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, when before the goat as well, you were mentioning about it may be inevitable that that people have to go through the kind of the technological haze. And then, but I've always had the kind of understanding that you have to be in life, you have to be in the belly of the beast. You can't change things from being outside, from being in a cave. You have to be within like the belly of the Trojan horse, and to experience it. And of course, many of the future change makers will have to be conversant with technology, maybe even programmers. So, I think it's right that they're going through it now, but like the twin goats, one may go in one direction and one may go in the other direction.
Mhm.
You know, I think that's going to be inevitable as well. Some people will go into the trap, and some will have this awareness and say, I'm going to use this to move through it. So I think perhaps in this generation, we're going to see not knowing which force is going to push in what direction or the other, but both these forces, unawareness and awareness, coming through the haze and finding themselves. So maybe we're in a time of uncertainty whereby we all have to, young and old, whatever state we're in, find ourselves again.
Yeah. Well, I think it may be a perfect example of both and rather than either or. And the mindset of the culture, Western culture, has been if it's this, then it can't be that. And ultimately, I think that's a mistake. I think it's, you know, the world is multifaceted and many dimensioned. And so the mindset, what I'm hoping for and working towards, is having a mindset in which we recognize multidimensionality, that it's not so easy to define almost anything because it's all in motion and multifaceted on many levels and in many dimensions. And I think in some way that is what we're trying to learn. So, you know, like political systems in which you have these two sides that bash each other around and one wins and the other loses, that's got to go out. You know, that makes absolutely no sense for anybody. And all it ends up in is fighting, and also fighting as a pattern. You know, if I'm right, then you've got to be wrong. And the world is multidimensional.
Yeah.
And that is what we're trying to learn, I believe. But we're so accustomed to that thinking of right and wrong, of, you know, well, not right and wrong, but there's only one way. And any other suggestion is obviously wrong and has to be fought over. So, and that's what I'm finding in the Old Testament is, oh my God, they fight over everything. And God is right there in the middle of the fray, calling the shots. So it's a shift of perspective that I believe has to happen and is trying to happen. And a recognition that it's either all or nothing. You know, we're either all in it together and recognize the correctness of just about every possible argument. And then in the Native Americans, I have learned basically use that the gatherings of the wise people of the tribe. Everybody was listened to, and everybody had it was generally just the men, his own perspective on the issue. And then the job of the head guy is to put them all together to the extent possible, because that represented everybody, and it also represented the nature of the world, which is it's not just one thing, a lot of stuff going on. So how do we do that when we're not accustomed to doing that, and when the problems are so complex? And then some people are technologically wise, but philosophically not. Other people are poetically and philosophically wise, but can't do technology to save themselves. And how do we all live together? Because none of it's wrong. It all has a place. And how do we have to start by recognizing that it all has a place. And that seems to be the hardest thing of all.
It's the hardest thing of all, I think, because we've been programmed into this polarity mindset. And I think actually one of the consequences of what we're seeing in the world today is that I think it's showing us how decrepit is the polarity mindset, because now people are realizing that it's a kind of falsity. Because until I mean, many people until now still kind of had faith in the left-right politics, you know, and in America it's very strong because you have the Republicans and the Democrats, and there's never been an alternative like in other countries with their coalitions. So it's always like, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? And now, because of the shenanigans that's been going on, people are realizing, hey, you know, the Democrats are now more extreme than the far right in some elements, you know, and vice versa. So in fact, they're all kind of all these are false polarities. And so I think people are realizing that they're being tricked. So it seems as if the time we're in is actually so destabilized because these polarity extremes are being exposed for the falsity they are, and that creates disturbance. Like when to pull out the weeds, you have to disturb the topsoil. And I think we're disturbing the topsoil of our perspectives right now because the polarity paradigm is collapsing. And as you said, we need a new perspectives. And you mentioned quite a bit about the Old Testament. One word that I've been come across my radar recently is the word repentance, because it's been used a lot in religious terms. But repentance is a kind of modern definition from the original word in Greek, which is metanoia. Metanoia means to change one's mind. So when we got the definition of repentance, we thought we have to repent our sins. The original definition was you have to change your mind, change your perspectives. So, I think what you're saying, now we're going through a time where we need to change our perspectives. Not through any kind of religious repentance, but just breaking down these old forms. And this is the ideal time for it.
It is the ideal time for it. And I think I would use the word opening up our perspective more than breaking down our perspectives, because we've been taught to think in these very narrow terms. And the world is not narrow. And it's about time that we recognize that we live in a multivalent universe that is more vast than anything we've been allowed to envision. And it's that lack of allowance that I am hoping is actually fraying now. And a kind of trust of people. We're not so stupid as we're made out to be. And yeah, we are going to make lots of mistakes no matter what we do, but we're already making profound mistakes on a regular basis. And that has to change if we're going to survive. So how do we do this? Well, I'm an elderly woman now. I'm going to be around just for another couple of years, maybe. But the young people are coming in and they are saying, in their own ways, they are saying no. They are, and many of them are taking their own lives because they simply don't know how to handle what is madness, and it is madness. So, as elders, what do we do? How do we do this? And for me, I ask myself variations on this question every single day. And the best answer I come up with is start with yourself. How are you? So there's this person who lives in your neighborhood, say, and he or she really irritates you, and etc. And it leads to getting in fights and stuff like that. Okay, can I do it differently when we meet on the street? Can I do it differently in relation to this person? And can I do it differently in relation to myself? And where I mean, all of this is leading to where I come to and how I use it at my best is to recognize where I'm terrified, where it hits my buttons. And then I say, okay, that's the issue, not the other person, not even our relationship. It's my own buttons. And then I kind of crawl back home and try and face the realities of my own, the holes in my own psyche. And there are many, and there are many for all of us, I think. So it all comes back to oneself, I believe. And for me, the hardest thing, which I think is absolutely essential, is loving myself through it, trusting I'm okay. Yeah, I'm stupid about that, and I've always been, and I'm scared of this and that. But ultimately, that's what I can work on. I can't change somebody else, but I am willing to work on myself. It's a relief.
Well, I mean, the old phrase, people say you go out and change the world, but then I think people start to realize, saying, well, if you can't change the world, change yourself. As you're saying, go back to the source material, because if you start wanting to change the world, but you haven't changed, you're just imposing the same patterns on the world, the same ways. It's just a continuation of the same ways. But if you can change yourself first, then whatever you can then contribute will come from a different place. But Carolyn, I think you're right in putting the responsibility on ourselves, because often when we encounter other people, we project ourselves onto them, onto our relations with them. So what you're saying is that you're calling for quite a sharp degree of self-awareness. That also reminds me of the golden rule. Treat others as you wish them to be, as you wish to be treated yourself. So that's a part of self-observation. It's a part of self-awareness, and you're putting a lot of degree of focus on that. Do you think that the younger generation are going to be up for the task of that that quality of self-awareness when they come into relations of other people around them?
Well, I guess some will, some won't. There's an awful lot of self-awareness training going on publicly through this medium that we are on. I don't know how much of it gets to you, but there are, international groups that train in every kind of religious, self-awareness, self-healing. There are many variations on that the focus of self-growth. And that didn't used to be the case. So I take it as a positive sign. There's also this medium that we're on that allows us to talk to each other across an ocean is really miraculous. And people are doing this. So there's a lot of teaching that's going on that's attended by people all over the world. And there's a lot of change in the science itself that I've been learning about through this medium. I don't know how many people around the world are aware of it, but Einstein's uncompleted equations about the nature of reality and the nature of the universe have been completed now by and then I'll send you some of that information. It's phenomenal. And so there is that is happening out there and being witnessed and learned from by large numbers of people, which is a real mind changer. And they're the same two scientists who have been working on this have also been examining artifacts that have shown themselves with the changing of the waters around the world. Mm-hmm. Things are found deep sea and high mountain and things that have been dated to before we thought there was human history, way before. So this changes it changes archaeology. It changes our definitions of, of who we are and how long we've been here and what we knew. So the whole notion of anything before us was hunter-gatherer is now disproved.
Mm-hmm.
There were very highly developed sciences and civilizations. And now the whole thing is happening that's bringing in beings extraterrestrially. So our whole definition, our whole understanding of what the world is radically being revised. This is so exciting to me. And a lot of it happens to fit my own intuitive sense of what's been going on this planet all these years that I've been laughed at for and, got F's on my papers in college and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently I was looking in the right direction. So as this comes to light and more people learn of it, our minds are being changed whether we like it or not. And since, this is an idea I've never thought before, but since it's in our interest to actually be better than we thought we were, and that we're capable of things we thought we were not capable of, I think more and more people are going to espouse it. Mm-hmm. And have hope and find the strength to live in a different way. And one of those things is basically love rather than war. So, now what I recognize is that the whole warring notion and the, gathering of property for oneself and the kind of monetary systems we have are not in our interest, even in the ones who were the winners. It's not in anybody's interest. And if we are evolving spiritually and mentally, then that's not interesting anymore. What we want is the larger perspective. Whether we think we do or not, that's what we want. And now the world is at a point where our very lives depend upon it, because we're destroying the sources of our lives, the soil and the biosphere. So here we go. We're right at that crux. And for me, it's very exciting because it's very exciting, but also it's what I've been working on before it was popular to work on this stuff. Mm-hmm. I've been writing books basically on the subject and having them sort of ignored. But things are changing. And there are people like you and I and all of the folks that we know and that we listen to who are out there saying their own piece of that. Pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Exciting times. I think now's the ideal time to bring back those old car stickers from the 1970s and 80s that you put on your bumper saying, "Make love, not war. See driver for details."
Yeah. Never seen that second bumper. That's great.
My brother had it when he was on his first car, and when my mum used to borrow it, she was very worried that people were honking behind at that.
It could have been very interesting.
Yeah. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that the crux of it is the nature of our reality, and that we've not had enough anomalies in the system to try to rearrange the way we've framed our reality. And now we have the new understanding in the sciences coming through. We have new discoveries in archaeology from past civilizational cycles, which we were told never existed, or they were blanked from us. And also I think a kind of re-sacralization, because we've kind of cut ourselves off from a sacred impulse. We don't realize that we are kind of sacred beings in these bodies. And so we've long been feeling ourselves to be just isolated bodies, But of course, the whole idea of reframing our reality, we understand that we're all connected as sacred beings in this whole multi-layered existence. And I think the science thing is crucial because, you know, again, what part of our problems is that it's a consequence of this mindset that we are just, the species is an accident on this planet hurtling through, you know, dead space. And that's an anti-life paradigm. Whereas now science is, we realize that we are part of a living cosmos. There are other dimensions of this cosmos. There are other living entities on different vibrational planes of the cosmos. And perhaps the more that younger people go into these digital realms, it'll start to give them understanding that the physical realm is not all there is. Although the digital is a very small part of that, it does make them realize that, you know, if we can have avatars, then we can have other species as well. And you know, if also popular amongst the younger generations is hypothesis, the simulation hypothesis, that, you know, we are living a simulation. That's a technological framing of the idea that we are worlds within worlds within worlds. And so if we take that on a sacred level, we are part of one world within many more vibrational densities of much more multiverses. Then once we break out of this box, then, you know, we are so more expanded. Then I feel that so much more is going to rush in and you know, just kind of expand us and our perceptions and that.
Well, it's rushing already. And I mean, we are part of the rush. And what I've been noticing is that these conversations, which I don't think used to happen, are happening all over the place. There are lots of interesting people talking to interesting people who live elsewhere and having these very deep conversations. And so anybody can tune in, you know, with the magic of this machine. So it's very exciting. And there's another piece of it that I find really relevant and very exciting. And that is that what we are doing as we are talking to each other across oceans and connecting amongst one another all over the world in various ways over every single thing, we are actually presenting the pattern of the universe. We're doing it, we're being it, but in a solid conscious way, without realizing necessarily that we are mimicking the way the universe works, in which there are many, everything sort of comes together. It's all part of one thing. It's what was I thinking the other day? The net of Indra, the Buddhist image, where everything is connected. There's this beautiful net, and everything is interconnected with everything else through all time and space. I mean, beyond time and space, way beyond time and space. So there is nothing that is outside it. And that says to me that none of us can be outside it. And so the notion of having me fight against you to win is ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense, because it's either all of us or none of us. But there's no such thing as none of us. So it's got to be all of us. And that we then mimic and resonate to the whole universe in every moment, every act, every minute of our lives. That's pretty exciting.
Very exciting. You know, and as you say, when you start to mimic something, you start to resonate with it because you become on the a like kind of attraction. And you say, so, you know, we've probably not been aware so much before that we are a blueprint of the cosmos, because we've been compartmentalized mentally, emotionally, perceptionally, and we've not had the vocabulary to speak about it either. Now, you mentioned Indra's net. Now, before, if you want to mention Indra's net, you had to go into present as a Buddhist text, and only a very few people would perhaps come across it or be interested. But Indra's net, one way to describe it is through the science of holograms, is that one portion contains the whole. And people can understand that because they have the vocabulary of holograms. So I think now we've come to a stage where we can actually we can understand it more because we have more tools of the vocabulary and to describe it. So, and so like in the 60s, and especially in the US, there was the kind of the flower power movement and the big, psychedelic movement and the LSD movement, and people were getting temporary experiences of these other realms of altered states of consciousness, and coming back and then scrambling to describe it. What we need now is to be able to have this expanded consciousness without the drugs, a natural kind of evolutionary moment, and then being able to share the experiences because we have the vocabulary. And that, I think, is forming now. So that was an early wave, where we had temporary glimpses of the crack in the cosmic egg. And now I think we have to try to bring it into a permanent state where we can all share and say, yeah, I get you, I'm on the same page. We have to get that commonality of references, perhaps.
Well, it's so much more than it used to be. It's actually very exciting to me because I have always been able to get to that state. I mean, I lived there basically without the drugs, and I was even studied in the early days by psychologists because I spoke that language naturally and had never taken any psychedelics and still haven't. But because I know it intuitively myself, I know that we are all capable of doing that. I just happen to have that particular gene pretty early in the game, but we are built to do that. And this has been known by indigenous people forever. And so it's been part of a whole life frame. And the fear around the psychedelics, which you didn't really get to live through when it was illegal, and oh my God, awful things were happening because people were so afraid. And I've seen that fear around things like crop circles, these miracles that are showing up all over the world in different forms, different places. And there's such a fear of anybody thinking in those sort of miraculous terms, because the power to define the world no longer can be in the hands of those who would like to do so, or who can make money from it, or have power from it. So, something huge is happening in the world as more and more people, young people especially, get opened at that level of the archetypes and realize that they're part of something. We are part of something. We are the something. We are a fractal. We're it. And nobody is not it. It's not a special group. It's a capacity that we all have. So, okay, given that, how do we foster it? How do we encourage it? And how do we assist it to happen? How do we have it define our political lives, our economic lives, our social lives? And that is what I'm hoping the new science, once the new science is accepted by the scientific establishment, who are very, very stubborn people, because I know them well. I've even given birth to some.
They came out as scientists.
they are, but I mean, and they're very afraid of it, of this thing, this sort of what do they call it? Not unconscious. I mean, it's an unscientific way of thinking and perceiving the universe that we all live in. And from my perspective, I'm so glad to see in my lifetime that we are getting there rapidly. Because I think as a species, we cannot survive continuing in the same thought forms that we've been living in for the last whatever it is, 20,000 years. That period is over. And we've got to allow it to be over so that the imaginations of our young people can be stoked by these new ideas, which they are desperate for.
That's, yeah, for sure. And that's why I've often said that we're going through this shock period because we need it. We couldn't wait much longer for things to change because, we need it so badly. Just like we had the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89, we need other walls to fall, and very quickly. And that's why I do feel that these shocks we're going through is because they have to put it in our face for us to have the realization. Because the powers that be, or the powers that want to be, are really trying very hard to demonize the other. Whether it's a racial demonization, whether it's a national demonization through warfare, and we've had all that. We've had the Cold War, we've had the East and West, and they're still doing it now with different countries, like the bad commies and the bad Ruskies, and they're trying to divide people. And it's like saying, well, people are categorized by their national so-called government. So Americans are all like Biden, and British people are all like Rishi Sunak. I mean, it's so childish that people have to realize that's nonsense. That's absolute BS. And it's so in our faces now that it's helping us to realize the stupidity of that thinking, so we can break it down and bring up new relations, non-linear relations. Because the old relations were linear because they were based on your local communities, because that's how far we could communicate. Now we've gone non-linear, decentralized. We can communicate all across the world in different stratas of societies. And I think that non-linearity is a reflection, is a blueprint of all this interpenetration of all relations in the cosmos and the universe. Everything's interrelated, and we have to now, you say, get rid of this demonization of these linear polarities. And it may be a shock, but the walls have to come down.
They have to come down. And what this is all reminding me of is something that happened to me when I was, I don't know, maybe 11 years old, 12 years old. It was during the Second World War, and a young Dutch girl came to New York, where I lived at the time, to live with her aunt, and in my neighborhood. And I lived amongst ignorant people. We were poor, and mostly Italians, Irish, and Jews. And we were kids, and the kids all got along together. Anyhow, this young Dutch girl came to live in the neighborhood, and the kids decided, and I don't remember who started it, that she was part of the enemy and would not let her play with us, and formed a group of taunters, taunting at this girl and calling her names. And I was with my friends, and without stopping for a moment, I joined the taunters. And it was only, afterwards that I thought, what did I do? What did I do? And forever after, tried to make friends with her, but of course she would not talk to me with reason. And it became a very important experience that I had, because I realized I was drawn into where the crowd was. And that, I think, happens a lot politically, is you just go with the folks you know.
More than politically, it's the way that the world has been manipulated through the mass behavior. If you can learn how to control the masses, then you've got the majority of people, on you, thinking the way you want them to think and acting the way you want them to act. You can have a few on the periphery. It doesn't matter, because you always get a few on the fringe. They can do what they want. You don't worry about them. But if the people in power can get the influence the masses, what Matthias Desmet has called, mass formation, psychologists, psychiatrists, mass formation, then you've got, they got it sorted, because most
Right.
people would fall into their peers. And so I think that's been happening a lot because of, that's why we had the media and the culture industries so centralized and controlled, to give out similar messages, to create a mass mind, and the way to keep the mass mind together is through fear of the other, and those are very basic linear relations. And I think that's part of what's crumbling now, is that we have these interrelations, and that's going to come about by having these making it so obvious that it's stupid to have these mass-minded things. And it was very strong in the last 2 years with the health situation, because people were made to fear. And now people are thinking, actually, something's going on here, that we've been put in boxes. So, I do sincerely feel these times have been so uncomfortable to help us, to push us to break through those limitations that have been placed on us, but are not inherent in the human being.
Yes, I agree. And I'm looking also very closely at the young people. There are different folks being born, and have been for the last, I would say, at least the last 30 years. And many of them are falling by the wayside because their bodies can't handle. I mean, I don't know why they are. It's too scary to be them. I think they're not fully formed. But more and more are coming onto the scene and are forming their own block, and watching those people who have been sort of defined as being sick or obscene, the whole gender reformation, redefinitions of gender, and definitions of correctness, and even definitions of happiness. All of that is coming into question. And the initial groups, I noticed, sort of fell apart. They were frightened, I think, or not really that strong within themselves to handle it yet. But that's changing. And so there's redefining going on. And people are saying, no, I am not that, and I am not that. I'm something else. And we're going to call it da-da-da. And the courage that takes, and this new sense of community that's happening over everything and everywhere, is what gives me hope. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to just turn away from this mass mind and saying, hell no, I'm not part of that. But I am this, and here are my buddies.
It takes courage, but once you start, I mean, everything is based on energetics. Once you start to shift your energetics, you naturally start to resonate with something different. So I think it comes down to that. And like anything, in the initial stages, things can fall both ways. I mean, it's good that people are moving from these mass kind of set blocks and set polarities, but I think also there's an attempt perhaps to hijack that, to divide people and say, well, okay, let's, before there was polarity in gender, let's make, many different types of genders, and let them start to fight amongst themselves about who they are and their social identities. So there's a danger that people don't get pulled into, fighting for their social identity, but realizing that we're all the same fundamentally. We are choosing a certain way of expression in the physical life, but that isn't fundamental. It's one part of it. Essentially, fundamentally, we're all the same. So I think we have to, again, always bring it back to the essence, and not be pulled out of ourselves into the secondary forms. And those relations, those essential cosmic relations and universal relations, are all essential. And I think we have to make sure that we don't define ourselves by the secondary aspects.
Right. Well, that's pretty subtle. So hopefully this new breed of human is more subtle than the prior breeds of human. who knows? I mean, this is school,
Yeah.
and hopefully we're slowly, bit by bit, learning. I just worry that the timing be right with the natural world. So, because we're losing a lot of what we need to survive. And it's very frightening. However, at the same time, we're gaining a whole new level and angle of understanding. And the thing that's exciting me the most these days is the recognition of the fungal network, which is a metaphor for everything and changes our understanding of the living web of all life. So, well, I'm just counting on it because everything is there. All the pieces that we have to learn are really there, right there in the mycelial web, if we can understand the mycelial web. And it's, it's a perfect example of the human web, of the everything. I mean, it is the web. There's nothing but the web, interconnected on every level, on everywhere in the universe, not only on our own planet. So it's a very exciting time with the possibilities right there. And bit by bit, I watch these individuals, generally young ones, who pop up on the internet and say their piece. And I go, oh my God, who is this? And where, keep talking. Who do you know? Let me introduce you. But it is happening. And not a moment too soon.
I'd have to agree on that point, because I think it is now or never, because there's so many things in flux and fluctuation, and there's so many critical points coming that even it seems that if we don't get it right, we don't have much time left, because so many things are coming to their closure, or coming to a head in terms of friction. But I've always had faith in the in the resilience, not only of human nature, but the resilience of all nature to kind of, at the last moment, kind of, get it right and switch into synchronization, and because otherwise we wouldn't have been here. We've gone through so many potential ends that, if we hadn't learned to kind of, the last minute kind of get it right, I think the earth would have been doomed a long time ago, in many ways. So I think there's a natural driver through evolutionary impulses, evolutionary natural forces towards this, as you say, this coherency, this interrelation. But there's only a small minority of these evolutionary forces, let's call them. But they seem so much grander because they're making all the noise. They're banging all the drums in the street, and they think there's many more of them, but they're not. The forces of coherency, and we mentioned before, the forces of human good nature, and we believe in human good nature, that they're so much more predominant. It's just that we're just being distracted by the noisy little people in the corner, the noisy school bully. The school bully is only one, and the playground's for the many of us. And I feel that we've been pushed and pushed by the school bully globally, but that's going to force us to realize that, we are the many, and we have the potential, and we are going to change it at the last minute, because, we have to get into the stranglehold, we said the bottleneck, and then we start to kind of last minute synchronize into the right order. And, I do feel that's, through time that will happen. But we're seeing this rearrangement. All rearrangement is messy. When you shake a bottle of water, it's got sediment at the bottom. The sediment clouds the water, and then it settles again. But it's not the majority. It's just a small particle.
Right, and you don't need the majority. So what this all brings up to me is the Galapagos Islands, one of my favorite places on the planet, which is an example of that. of its own sort. So you have this volcano, and it builds itself up in the middle of the ocean, and it's all rock, and there's no life on it. But gradually, over time, what happens is the winds and the waves bring a seed here and a bit of a, a clump of soil from the mainland there. And before you know it, and then the birds come, and then there are these swimming creatures. Before you know it, you have a world, a living world on what was rock. Mm-hmm. Now, if one was just looking at that hot rock and trying to imagine a living world there, you would say that's not possible. But it is possible, and it takes time, but it's real, and you can trust it, but you have to have patience. So that was one thing. And then another thing, which was really important, which I've already kind of forgotten, is the fact that, the historically, the world goes in cycles, and we are at the end of one very long cycle. What is it, 52,000 years or something? And we've come full circle. And so, of course, it's got to fall apart because that's the nature of the cycle. And there's that remnant that makes it through and starts over again slowly.
The spores.
So, right. So that's what, I think you and I'll speak for myself, that's why I'm here now. That's why I got born when I did. Mm-hmm. Whoever the hell I am on a longer scale, I have no idea. But I am quite, it's been clear to me for a long time that I had work to do. And it's very clear to me now what that work is. And I love the way the universe helps to get it out there, such as this man in England who calls me up one day and says, "You want to do these conversations?" We hadn't talked to each other for 10 years. And there you were. And I said, "Yep, I'll do it. Of course, that's how I'm going to start getting the word out." So magic, magic is real, and the technology is there, and the friends are there, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a valid point to kind of close on that. The spores, don't look at the stony ground, have faith that the spores will create a new earth, and that magic is there. And also, importantly, friends are there. And, put your faith in the greater cosmos and the universe, and put your faith and your love with your friends. And, there will always, after new cycles, be new beginnings.
And part of that is to have a good time in the process, to really have fun, because it's really an exciting game. And I'm very grateful to be part of it.
Wonderful.